Alright, the gargoyle rushes in, sword held high, and swinging for your head. Oh. Alright, I got this. Alright, I got 1 hit point left. Well, it's your turn. What are you gonna do? I cast Water of Healing. Oh, wait a minute. I cast Water of Healing. Hey there, and welcome back to Tabletop Witchcraft. This week, I wanted to do a little tribute video to my favorite game growing up as a kid, HeroQuest. I can't tell you how many hours I spent playing this game, painting the miniatures, making up my own quests. So I decided, I'm going to do a video here and a build on the game and what do I want it to be. And it didn't take long before the spell cards came to mind. And one of my favorite spell cards playing this game was the Water of Healing card. I always picked the elf because I always thought it was the perfect mix between melee and magic. So I went with this card here, and I always liked the grotto look of this lion fountain with this Water of Healing coming out of it. So that's what I did this week, my own rendition of what I thought that card looked like. But a cool little feature about this is that it transforms also into a crypt or like a little shrine area. Because as I was building it, I was thinking to myself, man, this really does kind of look a little bit like a crypt or mausoleum entrance too. So very simply, all you got to do is just pop the front of this out, and now you got a mausoleum entrance. And on the back, this also pops out, so you can put like a little shrine there or a book or something like that. So I'm going to show you how to do that this week. In the description below, there's a link to the plans if you want to follow along in the video. You can print those off on 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper, so it's easy to print off at home. So let's go grab some supplies and let's get crafting. So many of you might know that a lot of my artwork is inspired by stuff that I've read and played as a kid, and this build is definitely inspired by the Water of Healing card from HeroQuest. So head on over, grab the plans, cut that stencil out that you just saw. And here all I'm doing is blocking together a whole bunch of scrap pieces of XPS to fit that stencil size. And I'm cutting them out there on kind of a pretty low heat. You just want to have it be enough so that the hot wire will go through the hot glue as well. Now you can slap that stencil on there and just slowly make this cut. You can see I hit that seam right there, and it takes just about a second for that hot wire to melt that hot glue, but it really does cut through with no problem. Just don't force it. Now here I've cut out a column to match the number 1 size and width right there. It's a perfect square, and you're going to cut out a whole bunch of these sections right here. There's going to be 4 columns, and you can see on the plan how many ones there are. So I think you need, 8 or so of these. Once you have those cut out, trim the column down to the next size, the number 2 size, and figure out how many of those you need to cut. You can count them all up right here. And you should end up with a whole stack of pieces just like this. That's going to allow us to make the columns you see there on the right side of the screen. And all I'm doing is using hot glue to glue all these pieces together. Typically I would use, like a barbecue skewer or some toothpicks to hold all this together, but you don't want to do that here in this case because we actually have to cut a quarter of this column out to fit on this piece here in just a little bit. So just follow the plans here. You can see how we're stacking all these up. That little piece on the left is going to be the bottom of the column. Now I'm working on the top of the column. And you can make this as simple or as easy as you want if you don't want to follow the plans, obviously. Alright, so when you're done, you should have 4 columns looking something like this. Now we've taken Ulfa knife, and we're going to cut 1/4 of this column out. Just take your time, don't rush. You want to hold along the column as you're cutting it, that way it doesn't tear. But just cut that piece out, nice and easy, and it will fit on the corner of the Healing Fountain or the Mausoleum or the Crypt, whatever it's going to end up being for you at the end. And you can see I actually broke mine right there. No problem, just keep moving on. That little crack looked awesome once I put the wash on. It looked like a little crack in the column. Now, it's right around Easter time when I made the video, so I went through my wife's stash of stuff for the kids, found some Easter eggs, and these made the perfect shape for my Healing Fountain. So I grabbed a couple of these eggs, and obviously remove the candy out of them. And here, all I'm doing is measuring pretty much half of the top of the egg portion. Some of these eggs split in this way, like right through the, I don't know how to explain it, or like half like this instead of like through the bottom. So I guess cut these however you have to, depending on the type of eggs that you picked up. And I use those little snips on the right to get me going, and then the Ulfa knife to, you know, really slowly cut this, because these eggs tend to want to crack and split really quickly, typically in a direction that you don't want them to cut. So just go nice and slow, and it shouldn't be too much of an issue. Just cut them out to look like this pattern here when you're done. And all I did was use a little bit of super glue on the inside and a little on the outside to hold together. Spray it with some accelerant, and I was good to go. It held together real nice. And you want to do this a few times. Obviously, remove all the candy and hide the evidence so your kids don't see it. Back to the plans. We're going to cut this section out, which is going to be the wall section that's going to go around the fountain. So just trace that over onto our main block here. And again, cut this out nice and slow. You're going to hit, you know, if you use a solid block, you're not going to hit any glue joints, but for me, I hit a couple of them here. Just go nice and slow, and you should be all set. Now I'm cutting out a small sliver off of each side that we're going to put our egg face through for the fountain. Make sure to mark A and B on both of these. This is the side B. I'm going to cut a sliver off the other side for A. You want to make sure you really mark all this stuff out good with lines and letters so it goes back, because we're going to really like hack into this thing. So cut that top arch off. And now this cut is going to depend, it might vary a little bit, you know, based on the plans and the size of the eggs that you guys are using. But the plan does show that width that you need to cut out there in the middle. I think it's about a 1/2 inch. And all you're going to need is that middle section. Adding some texture with some aluminum foil to all the sides. It's a lot easier doing it now than when this piece is put together. And all this is just a design that I came up with for the crypt door. I drew this on here. Now I'm cutting that shape out with a very sharp, brand new X-Acto knife. You can put any design here, obviously, that you want. I just thought that, you know, this looked pretty cool. And go into the trusty clay sculpting tool to peel these sections out. If you've been following my channel, you've seen me do this before. Then we just slap a little hot glue with some barbecue skewers on the top of this thing to pin it in place. And you can see I put a little sunburst on top there for some more design. And I'm lining up A on one side, B on the other with some lines to make sure I've got center marked. And using one of my favorite texturing tools here. I'm just using this to round off the opening to the entrance here. And then I just eyeballed the opening for the egg to fit through on the fountain. And just keep shaving it. You'll see here the left side, it starts to bulge out a little bit. So all I do is just take my X-Acto back and just cut it a little bit thinner to fit. And I love hot glue. I just use that to hold the egg in place. As well as for the column here, time to add these in place. Put one in each corner and you're all set. Now typically I don't put things on bases, but I want to add some color around the base of this. So I'm using some chipboard here. Cut it to fit the four corners of each of those columns. Now I'm just adding a magnet into the center of that starburst. I'm sure you've seen this on my channel. Again, if you've been following it. These magnets, everything else I've been using in the video, can be found in the description below to a bunch of Amazon links. I try and put everything that I use in there in case you want to check those out. Now some rhinestones. We're going to put a couple of these around the door just to look like, large rivets, add some detail around the door. Now we're going to measure out each roof plank. Now I want to make the roof kind of interesting, so each plank is going to get longer and wider as we grow the roof, I guess. You can see it there. There's 3 planks. X right there, that's the longest one. It gets smaller as we get closer to the opening. So when you cut a section out for the roof, you want to make sure you cut 2 out. One for the left and one for the right. Because when we cut that block there that's still in the Proxon, obviously it's going to affect our later cuts here. Now I'm just eyeballing the width here for the first section of the roof and cutting a little sliver. That way they marry together real nice, the left and the right side. Now the length, obviously that's an issue right there. All I'm doing is cutting it to line up with pretty much the center of the column. And hot gluing those in place. And don't worry about the top seam so much because that's all going to get covered up. Now as you can see, this is a little bit wider than the first section and a little bit longer as well. And this is the final section for the top, again wider and longer. Now all I'm doing is putting like a bronze cap on the top of this thing. And I love these rhinestones. I'm really enjoying using these. Hopefully you don't end up seeing me walking around town with these all over my jacket. We've been using them like a lot of my builds lately. And then just putting some of these interesting little game pieces on each corner. And the columns looked a little plain to me, so all I did was just use a pen to really push in some more detail on the top and bottom of each column. Reaper. All right, I love Reaper miniatures. 77341, the Lion Pack. We're going to use those for this build. Cutting this piece in half, I really did cut pretty easy. Cut him at that angle. And then, I save the bottom half of this lion. The same with the lioness for the other side of the fountain. You never know when you're going to need those. And these snips right here work really well as the Ulfa knife, just to trim away the base from the paws. And now I held the lion up to the egg to see where this pin would come through. So I just heated up that pin, poked a hole. So when I drill and pin each one of these lions, the pin will poke through the egg and will help hold it securely in place. And I'm just pinning this with a pretty thick paper clip. And don't use really fine snips for this, like jeweler snips. You want a good pair of wire cutters like this. Now I broke out some air dry clay because we're going to use clay to cover the face of the fountain as well as the whole egg on the outside and the inside. And I save this little piece of foam when I cut the egg out. That way I can, get a rough idea of the opening that I need to cut out in the clay. I like to use tacky glue to hold the clay in place, and we're going to do just the surface first. And if you've got some time to work with this, don't stress out too much about it drying on you. You can always rehydrate it with a little bit of water. So just press this into place. Try to keep it, as clean as possible while you're doing it. And then trim the edges with an alpha knife. Now when you put this in place, really cool while it's still malleable, just press it to cover all the gap there if you have any error, and it will really hide that for you. Now I just slapped a little more tacky glue on. I rolled out another piece of air dry clay. And I'm just honestly, I had no idea what I was gonna do here and how this was gonna look, but it came out really nice. Just roll the clay up over the egg and then fold it in over the inside of the egg. Again, the inside also has tacky glue on it to hold it in place. And this is the part right here. I had no idea how I was gonna do this, but I just rolled it over. I started rolling the other side. Oh, bunch of excess, rip it right off. That's one of the nice things about working with clay. It's kind of does what you want it to do. And then I add some more clay to the inside, as well as tacky glue, obviously, first. And just use this clay sculpting tool to, smear it all together. This is a cool little trick. I just use tacky glue on a Q-tip and use that to rub back and forth to blend the seams together. And I find that works really well, so those don't separate when it dries. And here's a little more tacky glue on the back of the lion. And I've already, checked that hole where that hole had to be. I'm going to press this into the clay just a little bit. I'm going to get a little bit of excess tacky glue around the edge of the lioness. No big deal. You can use a Q-tip or whatever to get rid of it. A little bit of hot glue on the back of that pin, and it'll be secure in place. Good to go. And this is just a tree of life. I looked one up online, found a cool design. Because again, in my mind, this is a healing fountain, and I'm just carving in, a tree, real simple. Back to our trusty texturing tool, add a little bit of texture to the clay. And this is some Sculpting mold. I'm just adding a tiny little bit to the base here because we're going to make this a little bit of mud. We're going to add some more stuff to it here in a minute, but I obviously didn't want just cardboard showing here. And do the left, the right, and the other side as well with the Sculpting mold. And once that dries, hit the whole thing up with some Mod Podge and black paint. And I decided to break out the airbrush here. You don't have to, but I want to go with a really light stone color. So I use a real light stone gray. I'm using a little beige as well to, kind of do it sporadically to make it look like, I don't know, what's the stone I'm looking for? Is it limestone maybe? Leave a comment below if you know what I'm talking about. It's just a really light stone with some brown in it. And then I did these doors in a dark bronze and a highlight with a copper color. And I highlighted the crosses as well. Anything that the sun would be hitting at a 45-degree angle, I hit up. This wash really isn't even a wash. It's that beige color with some water. And I'm just splotching the stonework a little bit more to make it look like that's the stone. And then I'll go ahead and add a wash here in a minute. Okay, now we are going to wash the whole thing, but not super heavy. You can see I'm using a small brush and I'm just selectively placing the black wash lightly across the whole piece. I really didn't want to darken it up too much. And obviously you want to do the same with the front as well. This part's really cool right here when I hit up the lion. There's so much hair on that mane that it really takes that wash and it looks awesome. Looks really good when we dry brush it here in a minute. Now this is a patina. I make it myself. I don't like a really heavy patina like that look right there. I'm going to use a little bit of water to blend it in a little bit. And water drips down to the edge of this thing, so the rust is going to build up more towards the bottom of this cap. Now I'm just going back to the original stone color to do a light dry brush over the whole piece. Okay, so for the mud section, I used a dark brown, like a burnt umber. I used a light brown to dry brush. Now I'm just adding a little bit of PVA glue, and I'm going to take some static grass and place it right in here. I don't have a static grass applicator. You don't really need it for something like this. Honestly, I don't know if you could even use it in such a small area. Just use some tweezers, place it down, and use this clay sculpting tool to tease it in place without pressing it, and it looks great, just like that. Now I've cleared a little section on the side of this structure. Adding some more PVA glue, I'm going to add some purple flowers. These could be nightshade, or they could be just some pretty, flower growing on the side of this thing. I want to have it two looks, Healing Fountain and also a dark look like a mausoleum or a crypt. So I thought purple was the perfect color to kind of accommodate both. Now I got this tip from Neil over at Real Terrain Hobbies. Thanks, Neil, for making these, for that video, to make these vines here. Just a mixture of a couple different colors of this fine turf. I added some of that grass that we used a few minutes ago, a couple different colors of leaves, and what we're going to do is mix all that together, and that's going to be our base for the vines. The vines here are made out of garden twine, so just unravel those, get them to the shape that you want, and you'll see how we're going to apply it here in a second. All you have to do is spray the twine with some, I use Gorilla spray glue, I find it works really well, and then just douse it in this stuff, and then let it dry, spray it again. You got to do this probably 2 or 3 times, but the vines look really good, and it's a quick and easy way of doing it, as opposed to how I did it in my tavern video. I'll put a link above to that. They both look great. This is just a lot faster option. Now to cover that seam right behind that vine, obviously I used the vine there. You got to get creative to cover up some of these seams. You don't always want to use another piece of XPS to cover it up. And I'm just using a little bit of Eileen's tacky glue to hold it in place. Okay, so the lion, we're ready to start our water effect. A little bit of super glue in the lion's mouth. Then I'm taking an 8-pound test fishing line, and I'm dipping one end in some accelerant, which is going to almost instantly set it in place. This stuff works so great. I will always have accelerant with my crafting gear. There you go, it's set, ready to go. Then I just cut it to length, bent it so it was inside the fountain. I'm going to use a little bit of super glue just to hold the other end in place. Okay, so this is just some Envirotex 2-part epoxy, using a yogurt container to hold my pieces up here. I put like 1 drop of a blue ink just to add a little bit of color, hardly any. Honestly, I probably could have put 1 more drop in, but I didn't want it to look blue. But yeah, just pour that right in there. I ended up putting a piece of aluminum foil in front of this thing to hold it up perfectly vertical. Now I'm using some Vallejo water texture to add those ripples. This stuff dries clear, so don't freak out when you first put it on. And now I'm teasing some more of that same material onto the fishing line. And you've got plenty of time to work with this stuff, so get a nice stream, just the way you want it. Now this is some gold paint that I watered down big time with some water, just to add a slight shimmer to that healing symbol over the fountain. And then I just wanted the definition of the pillars and around the structure here to stand out a little bit more. So I took some Nuln oil and just selectively touched a few areas on here to make some of this stuff stand out. And it was a perfect finishing touch to this healing fountain. Alright, so the cool thing about this build is that obviously it is the Healing Fountain, which was inspired by HeroQuest, one of my favorite games growing up. But, you know, why go through the trouble of making this whole thing when, you know, if you get rid of these fountains, it sort of looks like a crypt or a mausoleum entrance, right? So very easy. You just pop these out. Now you got yourself a crypt entrance that looks totally awesome in a cemetery somewhere. You could leave this piece in here if you wanted to, or you could pop this out and you could put like a little altar in there with a tome on it maybe, or just leave it, you know, empty. But it's a really cool, versatile piece for the table. So I hope I did HeroQuest justice. Let me know in the comments below if you played this game, what your favorite character was or spells, if you chose a spellcaster class. As I mentioned earlier, the plans are available in the description below. If you liked the video, took anything away from it, please consider liking and subscribing. Head on over to Patreon, a bunch of cool tiers over there for you to check out. Join that community, it's growing week by week. And until next time, I'll see you around.